Tuned to the fact that we'll have Professor Charles Davis from CSU, same room. This is going to seem like our clubhouse or something. We're just going to be so bonded to this room and our shared company here. So same time, same place, next Tuesday, Charles Davis will talk on that extremely important subject of the jurisdictions of local, state, and federal authority and how they are meeting with each other in a kind of transforming federalism is taking shape around that. So join us for that. And then I have a delightful announcement, which is the week after that is spring break. Woo! Students, would you join me? There's several of my students here. Woo! So there we are. Great. Hey, they're happy. I'm happy. They're happy and I'm happy. So, and then I will be just in a state of joy when they come back from spring break. I can't wait to see you guys when you're back. But it will be fresh and delightful for all of us to have that. And so we will not have a session here on spring break. We will skip the last week of March, and then we will also, because everybody is in a crazed state of overstimulation during the Conference on World Affairs, we will not try to compete with that. So we will also be without a session on the week of the second week of April with the Conference on World Affairs, and then we're back in the saddle and we're riding through for, I don't know what, 6 or 7 weeks after that, right? Joe Ryan is speaking. Good heavens, Joe Ryan will be speaking then, our leader in our project. So good heavens, please come back after spring break to see the great lineup then. Okay, I just want to say Senate American West does every now and then take a breath and do something besides fracking issues. And so on next Thursday night, March 21st, a week from this Thursday, two remarkable young people, Christopher Smith and Merritt Muller, who have made an excellent little film, not a little film, for heaven's sake, it's an hour film. What is little is it's about, you can see where I got confused, it's about tiny houses, about the movement to make itty-bitty houses and lives in a contained and sustainable way in them. So that's where the word little came from. So they will be giving that, showing that film. They are at South by Southwest right now. They are so much hipper than I am. They are really doing well in life. And so they will be here at Benson Earth Sciences, room 180, 7 p.m. on Thursday, March 21st. So please join us for that. It's a kind of Romeo and Juliet thing there because Christopher is a CU graduate, recent CU graduate, and Merritt is from Naropa, so it's one of those Montague, Capulet, delightful coming together of young people. Okay, so our speaker tonight...
Does it end tragically?
No, it ends delightfully. Oh, that is so important to point out. It ends in a delightful film. It ends in a... Although really, I'm saying things about their private life that I don't even know are true, so let's not... Two excellent young people are presenting a film. That's all I meant to say. Okay. So here we are. I want to say about the questions, we're going to keep the same custom because we were able to get, I think, almost everybody's interests addressed. So please take your cards from your programs, write your questions. If you have a moment to write sort of 2 or 3 words on your topic, that will help me in my sorting activities, which can be intense, as you might have seen last week. So, and then 15 minutes or so before the speaker finishes, we will collect those cards, but you will have a second chance. So if you have a question, you want to wait. I mean, that's ridiculous because no one could ask you questions about your last 15 minutes if we go by this. But if you have a question that you know you want asked, you can turn that in before the end of the speech, and then I can get prepared to ask those questions. That is really, I just was so delighted that we could get through all of the cards last time. Clump them. I think we got every subject matter. We got Estonia in. That's how effective I was, that I got to the question on Estonia at the end, which stumped Susan. You may remember that one. Stumped all of us, I think.
New edition of the American West.
That's right. The Center of the American Tie to Estonia is what we have now. Okay, so our speaker tonight, we are so fortunate to have Reagan Waskom on our team for this National Science Foundation project and to have him with us tonight. He is omnipresent in the world of Western water. He is the director of the Colorado Water Institute and director of the Colorado State University Water Center. He has a background in, was PhD at Texas A&M, and is his BS and MS degree, and his PhD is from Colorado State University. He works in subject matters, one of which was so delightful. I have to take that, it's probably in your program, but irrigation water optimization in water-limited environments. Now that keeps a person busy. That's not a small undertaking there. Evaluation of municipal water conservation programs. That's a huge thing there too. And then, this is one that just I think I might have swooned over this, ammonia volatilization from sprinkler-applied swine effluent.
It's been a long time.
But he is a consultant for us on 420. He will be helping us with volatilized swine effluent to keep the campus from disruption on April 20th. So we appreciate, we don't really, if that's a secret contract you have, you don't have to tell us about that. So in any case, he has background in quite a number of important issues involving water. He is a person who's committed to and really, well, I guess the word is gifted, though he may have cultivated it purposely with a long training program, but I'm going to say gifted at public communication and at taking his technical knowledge and sharing it with the rest of us. His topic tonight is the issue that seems to have, in some ways, the most attention in conversations about natural gas development and fracking, and that is the issue of water and the use of water in that undertaking. And as my understanding, you might say a few things about the uses of water in other forms of energy development as well, so we'll be able to put this in that comparative context. So, ladies and gentlemen, you are making smart choices in life because you have come to hear Reagan Waskom. So, enough of me.
That was actually an embarrassing introduction. But the swine thing, do you guys remember Amendment 14 when Phil Anschutz took on the swine growers? People have been around that long. Back in the 90s, we had Colorado Amendments 14 and 15, and I got involved in those. And like fracking is one of those research topics where people actually threaten your life. And, it makes life really interesting and enjoyable. But I have to say, this fracking thing may be more volatile than swine manure. And it's a lot more interesting. I'll put it that way to you. So, hey,
I like that methane.
that methane stuff. Delighted to see you guys. Aren't you supposed to be eating dinner right now? I mean, wow, Boulder's, you guys are amazing to come out and want to talk about this at night at dinner. And I'm happy to be here to do that with you. How many of you guys heard Susan Tierney last week? She was great, wasn't she? Yeah, really, her breadth of knowledge I found very refreshing. She talked a little bit about water, and that's really what I'm supposed to do tonight, is dig into one little part of what Susan talked about last week. And I mean, we're getting down into the details here, and I'm glad to do that. I wasn't tasked with doing the water quality part. Joe Ryan's going to do that in a few weeks, I think. So really the big question that I wanted to kind of unpack tonight was, what's it going to take to develop this energy resource in Colorado? And by that, I'm speaking specifically about shale gas, but we can talk more broadly about water and energy in Colorado and the West. And my life is about thinking about water, not so much about fracking, but couldn't get away from this. It just kept coming to us, this, what are we going to do about water for energy in Colorado? So I was really pleased to be a part of Joe's National Science Foundation team and to try to help contribute to that and think about it in the context of our water resource and how we protect and maintain that. And from a water resources guy, the question is really about sustainability, right? How do we sustain this state, the water resources that we need for our business, our lives, recreation, the environment, all of those things? And that's sort of the big question that we're trying to parse out here in Colorado. And I think the next 20 years are going to be really important in terms of how we answer that question. So what I thought I would do tonight, if I could, is I'll try to put this fracking thing in a context. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how much water is needed for fracking, where's the water coming from, and how folks are doing that. But then I'm going to kind of segue into looking at our entire water supply and thinking about it, thinking about water for energy in that context and where we're going. So this talk isn't going to be all about just fracking tonight, Patty. I'm going to talk about the bigger picture of Colorado's water resources, and I'm pleased to do that. So let's see if I can get her going here. Okay, so I framed that question, right? How do we ensure this sustainable water supply? And what is the part of energy in there? Does energy production have a role in water sustainability? I think another way you could probably ask this question is just simply, do we have enough water to put that into the extraction of shale gas. Is that, do we have enough in Colorado? And I think the corollary question is, well, if we do, if by the end of this talk I've convinced you yes or no, the corollary is probably, well, should that be simply a market-based decision? Or are there other considerations that you all want to think about? And I'm not going to create an argument pro or con on that second question. I'll let you all do that, and I'll try to give you some background for creating that, and then hopefully having some good questions and dialogue afterwards. So that's the way I'm thinking about it, and I'm glad to have any questions about Colorado water. This is what I think about every day. I don't know all the answers. In fact, I've been doing this for about 25 years, and I know less and less about it every day because there's just so much to understanding the way Colorado water works and how we manage it and how it all fits together. So I think the part of where I wanted to start with was this idea of sort of looking at the whole U.S. and how we're using water and how much of that water that we use is particularly for energy production, okay? And this is writ large, all right? And so one of the things you have to be careful about when people like me stand up and talk about water is we mix up our terms a lot in terms of water withdrawals, water consumptive use, and so you got to really make sure you know what somebody's talking about when you're throwing around these kind of numbers. But if you look at the entire U.S.'s water budget, and these are USGS numbers, and they do a census every so often and publish these numbers, and it doesn't change that much. Amazing. 48% of the water that's withdrawn in the United States is tied to energy production, okay? It's a tremendous amount of water that we use. What are we doing with most of that water? It's one pass-through cooling, right? It's for thermoelectric or nuclear or whatever, but it's cooling water. And so in a lot of ways, it's not a consumptive water, right? We take it through, we use it to cool, picks up a little bit of thermal energy, we put it back in the stream. Yeah, it's a little bit warmer, but not a lot worse for wear. I mean, that depends, so I'll qualify that statement. But we use a tremendous amount of water for energy in the United States. Now, when you switch to the arid West, the numbers look really different. Why? Because we use our water for irrigation, right? This is a different world. So when you look at east of the Mississippi, not much of the water that's withdrawn is for irrigation. You get out here to Colorado, 86% of our withdrawals are for irrigation in Colorado, and that's pretty typical across the West. The South Platte Basin, of all of our basins in Colorado, the percentage is the lowest. I think it's about 75% for the South Platte that goes to irrigation versus other uses, but you get on the west slope and it's in the 90% territory. San Luis Valley, the same. So what ends up happening when you look at these percentages of withdrawals, so in Colorado, the percentage of water that we're using for energy is a lot smaller amount. Here I'm down in the 2% amount, okay? Fewer people, less industry, less energy demands, less water demands in that sector, okay? So just kind of trying to paint that perspective for you. But I think what you have to understand is that there is a connection between water and energy that's very, very strong on both sides. We use a lot of water to produce energy. We use a lot of energy to produce, treat, and move our water around, okay? And so the two are tight. California, where they think nothing of pumping water over vast distances, about 19% of the state's entire energy budget is to move water around the state of California. So, the two are closely connected, and probably always will be. I don't know if anybody's here from Boulder Utility, but a normal city utility like this, the biggest customer of the electric utility tends to be the water utility. Okay, that's just the way that it works. And so there's this relationship we can't get away from. And so part of what I wanted to throw out to you guys tonight is looking at the water that's used in energy production, just in terms of how many gallons per megawatt, or how many gallons are being used for fracking, or how many gallons are being used for cooling. It's probably not a very sophisticated way to really understand the water footprint of energy production. I think that a better way to really look at this is in terms of water intensity. How many gallons per how much unit of output of energy, okay? And so this first graph I'm I'm showing tonight is really looking at this idea of water intensity just in electricity production. Okay, this isn't liquid fuels and other types of fuels. And the units here on the axis are actually gallons of water per megawatt hour. Okay, so I mean you could put this in a lot of different terms, but it's just a way to kind of start to look at things in a comparative way and see how it breaks down. And this, the first group of bars is conventional electricity generation. You see coal, steam, nuclear, oil, gas, combustion turbine, combined cycle, and you can see the numbers, what, around 500 gallons per megawatt hour, whether you're using coal, nuclear, oil and gas. Actually, it goes a little higher, and of course there's emerging technologies that are more efficient in terms of electricity production, and they use less water, right? They're starting to use multiple pass-through, they're starting to do combined generation where they're taking the exhaust heat, right, and using that to produce more energy. So there's ways that we're gaining efficiency both in energy production as well as in water use out there. When you start doing carbon capture, though, notice those numbers. Coal, that's actually pulverized coal with carbon capture. Man, it goes off the chart, doesn't it? It takes a lot more water to do carbon capture, at least the way we're doing carbon sequestration and scrubbing carbon out of coal fired plants right now. So this is an interesting point. Some of the better technology may be more water intensive in electricity point of view. And then the whole renewables. And this is, the renewables are really interesting, I think, because when you look at wind and solar, at least PV, the water footprint of those is quite low, right? The intensity of the energy that's generated doesn't tend to be as high, but you can start to think about different futures, you know, for the South Platte Basin. What does it look like if we have a wind future or a PV future versus a coal future or a natural gas future? And they definitely have different water footprints for different intensities of energy, okay? So that was looking just at electrical production. If you look at just energy carriers, whether that's wind, natural gas, nuclear, coal, solar thermal, which is using solar, right, to turn a turbine, crude oil and biomass. So this is another way to kind of break down this idea of energy intensity. And this is in terms of cubic meters of water per gigajoule of output. Again, you know, we could convert that to something else, but there it is. It's for comparison to purposes. So a cubic meter of water is what, about 264 gallons of water, whatever. But what you can see is if you compare the footprint of natural gas per unit of output compared to nuclear, well, it's about twice as efficient. Coal, natural gas is about 4 times. When you get up into looking at the liquid fuels around the biofuels, it's amazing what happens to that relationship. They really break down. And of course, it takes a lot of water to grow corn or soybeans or whatever you're going to use in your biodiesel or your methanol. And so again, comparative, right? And I think the point of that is trying to look at these sources probably more holistically. Whether is coal a good future for us in terms of greenhouse gas? How about natural gas? What does that do? There's a water as well as a carbon, and there's also an extractive cost in all of these energy sources. And so we look at, I think we need to look at these from several different ways. Okay, so let's talk about natural gas a little bit. So we'll segue away from sort of the big picture of the different energy sources to natural gas. And this is, I think Susan may have shown something like this last week. And what it's looking at is the large gas reserves, the proven fields. And you can see this is the top 100. Well, guess what? 30 of the top 100 touch Colorado. They're either within Colorado or around Colorado. And a couple of the top 10, right? The Wattenberg field and the San Juan field down in southern Colorado and New Mexico. These are top 10 fields. A lot of energy out there, right? That's really what those are showing in Colorado. And if you look at it in terms of the Rocky Mountain region, what do you see? The green is oil, fields that are predominated by oil. The red are fields that are predominated by gas. You can see that Intermountain region, the Rocky Mountains, tremendous energy resources out there, hundreds of pools. And why is that?
Cretaceous sea.
Yeah, that was an old seabed, right? That, you know, there was a seabed that ran from what, the Gulf of Mexico all the way up to the Arctic 90 million years ago, and for about 6 or 7 or 8 million years, diatoms and algae and sea creatures were dying and falling to the floor right along with clays and sands and other sediments, and those things laid down, and when the sea withdrew about 80 million years ago and the other sediments got on top of them, thermogenic oil and gas production, that's what happened. And so you end up with a region that is very rich in mineral resources. And Colorado, also really an energy-rich state in a lot of ways. And as you know, there's good things about that and things that are challenging as well. This is also showing red as the gas fields, green as oil-dominated fields. But you know, there's a lot of other energy resources in Colorado as well, right? So it's a rich state, and that comes with good and bad, as the people out in Weld County can tell you. So hydropower is a small amount of our energy resource in Colorado, but it's an important one, right? Coal, we have a lot of coal resources in northwest Colorado. We have uranium, so it's just, we are an energy state in an energy place, and that's part of living here. So one thing I want to make sure, because I know there's people in this room that have a lot of expertise, and there's people that maybe are newer to this. I'm talking about shale oil and gas tonight, what we could consider to be unconventional sources of oil and gas. I think sometimes people get oil shale and shale oil and gas kind of mixed up, and I don't know if you guys have sorted this out in earlier talks or not, but you know, you hear about these tremendous oil shale resources on the west slope, right? Over there in the Green River Formation, and we had the big boom, back in the 70s of the oil shale boom. And this is different, right? The oil shale is rock with hydrocarbons in a solid phase. The shale gas and shale oil, these formations, they tend, again, they're carbon-rich deposits, but they also have liquid. They tend to have liquid oil, gas and gas phase, a number of hydrocarbon liquids. So they're different, totally different, okay? I mean, totally different. They are different, and you can extract them differently. And so oil shale has not proven to be commercially viable yet in Colorado. There's been a long discussion about that, a lot of research. It's still ongoing. The water demands for oil shale are unbelievable, at least with conventional technology, the technology that's been proven to this point. So if oil shale goes big time in Colorado, we're talking 500,000 acre feet, a huge amount of this, 10% of the state's consumptive use could be needed in today's technology to utilize that. Shale oil is different, okay, and shale gas is different. So I just wanted to make sure we were on the same page there, because a lot of times I think these get mixed up. So in Colorado, we have a lot of wells being punched, right? And this is the map from the oil and gas, just showing the active permits out there. There's about 50,000 active oil and gas wells in Colorado right now. 20,000 of those are next door in Weld County. Okay, so Weld County is ground zero for development right now. So I wanted to pause here also and make sure we were on the same page in terms of conventional and unconventional oil and gas. I think those are kind of arbitrary terms. The Wattenberg field out here has been producing for a long time, right? I mean, this field's 100 years old out here in Weld. But the old conventional type of production, right, was you drilled into pools. You looked for those pools of liquid oil and gas that tended to, you know, it came out of the source rock, pressure and heat pushed it up into a trap, and you'd find those pools. And what's being thought of in terms of conventional, or unconventional, I'm sorry, oil and gas is really that gas that tends to be in tight sands, tight rocks, shales. So we've known for a long time there was a lot of hydrocarbons in those source rocks, in those shales. It was just a matter of how do you get it out of there in a way that's economically feasible, right? And we just didn't have the production technology to do that. So we've always been more fixated on what's considered to be conventional. Now, coal bed methane, Colorado has some pretty good coal bed methane deposits also, and that tends to be considered in that sort of unconventional. It might be interesting for us to talk about those tonight. They behave a little bit differently, but they produce a lot of water. I mean, those coal deposits are really aquifers. They act as aquifers, and the way you get that gas off of there is you have to take the water off to elute the gas off the coal cleats. But it sort of falls in that realm. And when we start talking about the fate of produced water in Colorado, coal bed methane kind of gets mixed in there and distorts the numbers just a little bit. Okay, so I think the hot formation that's causing all this interest right now is this Niagara shale up in, well, actually it touches Boulder County, doesn't it? It touches the eastern flank here. It touches Larimer County, where I live as well. We mentioned it was this ancient seabed. It's, the thickness out here on the eastern plains is about 200 to 400 feet. It's a pretty nice shale deposit. Actually, it stretches. There is some Niagara all the way over on the west slope as well, where it's a much thicker formation. And, folks have known about it for quite a while. But there's something new, right? And that is the extraction technology to get the minerals out of the shales, right? To get the oil and gas out of there. And that's a lot of what Susan talked about last week, I think, is that, there's been a game change. And the game change is new technology in terms of horizontal wells, right? And fracking is part of that. Fracking's not new, but I think the confluence of horizontal wells and fracking has allowed these resources to be tapped in pretty deeply. So as we think about this question that we're posing and going to try to dig into a little bit deeper here of water resources in Colorado and the West, and if I was to kind of jump ahead and tell you, yeah, and fracking takes a lot of water, if I was to say that, and then you looked at this slide, and Susan showed this to us last week, and what you see is, these are the different sources of natural gas production in the U.S., both on and offshore, I think is included here. And these graphs are amounts, and here we are. This is actually 2010 data going out to 2035. And what you see is top line is shale gas. Well, we weren't doing anything, were we? Until about 2005, it was a pretty small amount of the energy portfolio. Well, look forward to the future, and what do you see? Everything else declines, right? All the other sources decline, and shale gas goes through the roof. Now, these are projections. It may not work out that way. We'll see. But if I said, well, it's going to take a lot of water now to get that shale, what's it going to take in 2035, right? These are the questions that we're wrestling with here tonight. Okay, so what I'd like to say to you all is fracking is just one piece of the production. Actually, it's a very short part of the production cycle. It's a couple of days, it takes to frack a well. It might be out there for 20 or 30 or more years. And so it's important to really look at the whole life cycle of energy production from, start to finish. Getting that site ready, doing the drilling, how they handle those fluids coming and going, when they do the stimulation on the well, the flowback water, and then the produced water, and then finally, how do you close that site? How do you reclaim it? How do you revegetate it? And so there's a water aspect in almost every stage of that. And so it's easy to kind of get fixated just on the fracking, and there's good reason. And it's because that is the single biggest time when water is needed. So what I would say to you is from a water quantity point of view, and remember that's what we're talking about tonight, not water quality so much, but water quantity. The times when we're really bringing trucks in and dealing with water are during drilling. Obviously, we need water for making up the muds, right? The drilling muds, and you see and a lot of that's just recycled. So there's a certain amount of water needed for drilling. Fracking is when a big chunk of water. I'm going to show you some numbers here in a minute. And then finally, throughout the production cycle, there is so-called produced waters as well. Okay, so there's water associated with it. Remember, these are old seabeds, right? And so there's saline and brackish, and there's water down there that comes up. In Colorado, every barrel of oil we produce about 20 barrels of water. The oil business thinks of everything in terms of barrels. I never think of barrels, but it's 42 gallons, So you can see the ratio, though. We're bringing up a lot of produced water in Colorado, and we've got to deal with that as well. Again, we're thinking about That's, except in the case of coal bed methane, that's deep water, that's associated with these formations, that as you're moving oil and gas up the wellbore, you're also moving water. And you see, right, when you're driving up I-25 and you're looking out there, you're seeing all these tanks, right? What are those tanks? That's the produced water, right? They're holding that water. I mean, it's not all produced water. There's also some hydrocarbons in some of those, but they've got to deal with that water. And we'll talk about how they deal with it as well. But the point I was trying to make to you all is that there's a water footprint all the way through this thing that you got to think about when you're trying to figure out how to optimize it and do it better. So, you know, here's your typical frac site, right? It's a pretty intensive little industrial site there. A lot of trucks, right? You bring in 300 or so trucks to pull off one of these jobs because they're hauling in a lot of water, they're hauling in chemicals, they're hauling in sand, putting it under a great deal of pressure, and they're using that to stimulate production. And what you see off to the side, of course, is the water tanks. And if you guys notice when you're driving out in Well County or in the production areas, a lot of times you'll see they're really more square box on semis is what a lot of the water and the mixing and the frac gels. And really what they think of it, the energy, they don't think of it as water. They tend to think of it more as a gel, and it is. You've heard it called slick water, but really it has a consistency of kind of a loose watery gel is what the fracking fluid is. And the reason it has to be gelled like that is the whole point is to move some sand, or what they call a proppant, down into those fractures, right? So typical frac fluid is about 90% water, about 9% or more sand, and then about 0.5% are other chemicals, and those chemicals tend to be acids, biocides to keep fouling from being a problem. There are the gelling compounds, which tend to be polyacrylamides, things like that, surfactants, a certain amount of salts because they want a certain osmotic strength to it, so that's where they use the KCl. So it's a small percent, but of course when we're talking about 5 million gallons, 0.5% is still a few gallons, right? So it may be a small percent, but it's still a significant amount of chemical. But that's kind of the way it looks. And you guys, I mean, this thing about Hickenlooper drinking the frac gel, right? I mean, that got a lot of attention. Yeah, I think he maybe regrets that statement, I'm not sure. But the point is that the energy companies, Halliburton and the folks that take out patents on this sort of thing, they are trying to drive this towards basically using food-grade chemicals for the fracking chemicals. That's their goal, is to drive it there. In fact, they probably are going to use organic food-grade chemicals. Who knows? But that is the goal. And how they do that, how they handle the biocide part of that, I don't know. That I think is a little bit more problematic. But so that's sort of, again, 90% of that is water and a lot of sand. And by the way, interestingly, my colleagues in Wisconsin, the frac sand is mined up in Wisconsin. There's a certain sand up there. It has nice properties. It's got the right amount of spherical to angular or something like that. And they've got a big problem in their county because of the craze on frac sand that's happening up there. So it's just interesting how these things push out. So anyway, I guess the other point I just wanted to make was that typically when they frac, they do so in zones, right? So they're going to come in. I mean, some of these horizontal runs on these wells, they go a long way, right? We're talking thousands of feet, and so they'll frac in zones. They've got to get a lot of pressure. I mean, we're talking PSIs in the 10, 15, 20,000 range to basically, you know, they're going to create those fracs, the fractures in the rock. They're going to prop them open with the proppant, the sand, and then that water is going to flow back to the surface. Okay, so that's kind of how it goes. And one of the things that you need to realize when you look and you see a well out there that's from in Canada or Anadarko or BP or whoever, a lot of the work that's going on top of the ground, particularly in these operations, is done with subcontractors, service companies, and so there's a lot of comings and going. And if you're out in Weld County, things may have slowed down a little bit right now because of gas prices, but these frac crews are moving around, and you see them, and staging those jobs is a big deal. So you've drilled a well, you're ready to go, you want to start making money, and the frac crew has got, wells lined up, and they're going from well to well doing their job. And so what happens is resources like water or sand or something like that become just a cost of business for these guys, right? They got $1 million worth of equipment and labor sitting on top of the ground. They got 2 days to do the job, and then they're on to the next one. And so what I'm going to talk about, what's happening really in water markets in Colorado, is flavored by that. Thousands of dollars for water is a lot of money for a farmer to spend, right? But for an energy company that's going and blowing, and they got a $10 million well they've just drilled, and they want to hook up to the pipeline, the cost of that water is a marginal consideration. It's a cost of business for them. Okay. So now let's talk about how much. That was a long setup for a couple of slides, right? How much water are these guys using? So here's the deal. It takes about 100,000 gallons of water for the drilling, right? Again, this depends on the depth of the well, but they're using that water mainly for get the fluid circulating the mud and lifting the cuttings up out of the hole, right? That's what they're doing with drilling. And that doesn't vary that much. And I'll show you some data here in a minute that'll make that clearer. But that's about the water footprint that we figure when we got the rig on site and we're drilling. Fracturing is a little different, right? So what happens is, the old technology was just vertical or directional holes, right? And there's a reason for that, and there's people who probably in this audience know a lot more about it, but it's really a change in the drilling technology that's allowed us to go down and turn these corners so sharply. We're not spinning the pipe anymore, right? We're just spinning the bit at the bottom of the pipe, which is different from how it used to work. And so these guys can, Niagara, they're going out down there and they're going 6 or 7 or 8,000 feet down, and then they're turning that 90 degrees and they're running through that shale formation. You think about punching a hole through it versus coming down and going through it. The productivity of these wells is really fantastic. I mean, a typical horizontal well will produce about 10 times what a typical vertical well will do. So you understand why that, you see that a cost benefit starts to make a lot of sense to these guys. In terms of fracking a vertical or a directional well, it's anywhere from 100,000 to 1 million gallons to do that. But horizontal wells are where you really see the big water footprint of 2 to 5, and I've seen numbers as high as 9 million gallons to frack one of these holes. And it depends on the length and also the formation. How much water will that formation take in the process? Number of stages, all of those things go into this calculus. So one of the energy companies let CSU pretty much look at their books. They opened their water books to us and allowed us to look at all of their currently active wells out in Weld County and to do some basically accounting of what their water use was out there. And this is what this chart shows. And it's an interesting chart, so I'll kind of walk you through it. The y-axis is water consumption in millions of gallons. I think in terms of acre feet, because I'm an ag guy, and that's kind of the way most water in Colorado is thought of. 1 million gallons is 3 acre feet, okay? And it's if somebody in here is an acre foot person like myself. But basically what you're seeing here, we've got horizontal well data, vertical well data, drilling data, fracturing, and then total. And so the way to read this graph is each one of these lines is an individual well. So there's about 450 wells here that they let us look at their data for. Okay? So at the bottom is the amount of water that it took to drill the well. All of these orange ones are vertical wells up to here, and these are horizontal wells. And so for the horizontal wells, the blue line is the drilling water, okay? What it took to install the well in terms of how much water they needed for mud. And then the lines on top are the water that was used to frack that well, all right? So in this group of wells that this company had, they had, what, 380 or so, I'm making the number up, verticals, and looks like, I don't know, 100 horizontal wells, right? Okay? So you know, what you see is all the way from no fracking down here. There were a few wells that they put in that were not fracked, to wells that took very little, to really your average, which is somewhere around 300,000 gallons of water to frack a vertical well. So that's about 1 acre foot. Okay? And then you put the drilling water on top of that, and you see it's a little over an acre foot for a typical, to bring a typical vertical well onto production. In terms of horizontal, what you see is numbers that start around, 750 gallons and go all the way up to 5 million gallons. And this is Well County data, okay, so it's local Niagara shale data. And the average that we came up for fracking water in the Niagara was about 2.7 million gallons of water, okay? And you know, then you add on your 100 or so for drilling, and you get into a water footprint for first frack, for the first stimulation, of about 3 million gallons. I think that's a pretty darn good number. And you know, I've seen different numbers for different fields, but that's a pretty good number. So you're talking, what, 9 acre feet of water, right? Just 3 million gallons, 9 acre feet. What does that mean, right? These are big numbers, and maybe you all don't think of water in terms of acre foot, but as I do. You know, acre foot's just a foot of water on an acre of land, right? So it's like a football field, which is about an acre, covered a foot deep, and that's 326,000 gallons. But I was trying to find some things that might bring this into reality. I don't know how many of you all have, I'm sure we have an Olympic pool here on campus. We've got, you must. So what I came up with, I looked this up, and it's about 2 acre feet of water to fill an Olympic pool. Remember, we're talking about volumes of water that are moved in trucks here. We're not talking about rivers of water. I mean, it's a finite, yeah, it takes 100 trucks to get the water on site, but it's, from an agricultural point of view, it doesn't seem like a lot of water. From a, you know, if you're somebody else, a swimming pool person, maybe it does seem like a lot of water. So the context is, in a good average year in Colorado, where we have average precip, we'll use about 6 million, we'll consume 6 million acre feet of water, okay, for all uses in Colorado, about 6. So, and we'll go a little bit further on what that means. I'll ramp this up for you here in the next couple of slides. And Patty, I'm getting close, but I'm going to start accelerating. So,
should we do some question collecting, just so?
if you'd like, do you want to do some question
Okay,
collecting?
if you have questions, and pass them down, and people will just, in a quiet, mouse-like manner, pick up the, not a mouse-like manner, that's ridiculous, but they will pick up the questions if you want to hand them, so thank you.
Great, yeah, and I realize I'm being a bit more loquacious
It's
than
great,
I
no, it's
intended
wonderful,
to be.
it's wonderful.
So I'm moving a little slower than I thought I would be at this point in time. So, folks, I want to take it, so I told you what it takes per well. What does it really take for what we're doing in Colorado, all right? And then I'm going to try to create a perspective for you. So if you look at new well starts in Colorado, and I just gave you for 12 going back to 7. 2007 and 8, we had a bunch of wells going on, didn't we? Where was that? Anybody know? Garfield County was booming, right? It was really booming over there on the west slope. So what I've got, this lighter blue bar is Colorado. The darker blue bar is new well starts in Weld County. And the brown bar is new well starts in Boulder County. So what you see, you know, the Garfield thing kind of went sleepy because of gas prices and cost of production. And, you know, for the last several years, we've been upwards of 2,000 wells per year. Actually, we hit 3,000. And look, Weld County just pretty much came in and took that, right? I mean, all of this increase you're seeing in Colorado is basically increase in Weld County. And that Boulder bar, where is that, Patty? Can you see it? There, so.
I can see it. I
Did
thought
you
I
see
thought I
it?
had a
I
moment
couldn't
there.
see it. So I put it in a table so you guys could see the numbers. When I tried to graph it, it just didn't work. And so here's the numbers, right? So let's just look at the last couple of years. 2,000 to 3,000 wells total in Colorado. Of that, about half of them were next door in Weld County. Everybody wanted to get in on the Niagara shale play. Boulder County, you drilled about 7 wells in 2011, and you drilled 14 in 2012. And then this slashes, I looked up to see how many horizontal wells you guys put in the county. You put in 4 horizontals in 11, you put in 0 in 12. So you guys are on the fringe of the productive zone, and that's part of that. And I don't know, maybe it's easier to drill in Will County, I don't know, something like that. We've gotten grumpy about it up in Fort Collins as
A
well.
lot of it's
so-
driven by the legal rights.
Yeah, I'm sure that's good. Thanks for that point. So the State Department or Division of Water Resources and the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission got together and really did a white paper and looked at how much water are we talking about, looking out to the future for Colorado to essentially bring these 2,000 to 3,000 wells a year online, okay? And these numbers are in acre feet because this is how water people think. And what you see last year, we were at about 16,000 acre feet for hydraulic fracking. We're going to go up towards 17 this year. And you can see sort of incremental increase in that. And basically it assumes that, you know, the rig count's basically flat, new wells relatively flat, and we're increasing in terms of total number of wells drilled, but we're increasing the number of horizontal wells. And so as we increase those, so you don't drill a horizontal well unless you really know what you're drilling into, right? You don't put $10 million into that hole. You drill the verticals and you define it, and then you come in and put the horizontal in it to get the formation. So what I'm going to do, and I'm going to try to go like 5 minutes or so, 5 10. So these are the numbers, okay? So basically, if you look at drilling water and fracking water in Colorado right now, you're talking 20,000 acre feet of water, okay? That's what we're using in the state of Colorado for oil and gas production. 20,000 acre feet. Yeah, you could also say 6.5 billion gallons if you like to think in gallons. So the question is that a significant amount of water? Do we have that much water? Anybody here from the Boulder Water Utility by any chance? I saw somebody stick their head in their coat. Maybe he was. I'm sorry, Houston. I'm thinking City of Boulder probably treats and delivers about 20,000 acre feet. I'm just based on the size of this community. I don't know if anybody knows, and check it and tell me if I'm wrong. Send me an email. But I'm guessing that's probably about. So you're talking for the state of Colorado about as much water as the City of Boulder is using in a year. Is that a significant amount of water? Yeah, I'd say it's a pretty darn significant amount of water. Is it significant in the overall scheme of things? Well, this is looking at ag water demand. Remember I said that 86% of our water in the state of Colorado is used in agriculture, right? So let's just look at the bottom numbers. I broke this out, but this falls in the category of way too much information. We've got about 3 million acres of agriculture in the state of Colorado. If we were able to supply those acres with what they want, it's about 5 million acre feet of water, okay? So that's how much water we're consuming each year. 80% of that water that we use in agriculture goes to grow things to feed cows. Hay, grass, alfalfa, corn, okay? The other 20% goes to things like sugar beets and wheat and potatoes and onions, things that you might want to eat directly. You might want to eat cows too, but you don't, you know. So anyway, that's the perspective on it. So ag demand about 5 million acre feet, energy water about 20,000 acre feet of water. I'm not saying it's insignificant amount of water. I'm putting it into that perspective. And then we'll talk about where's the water coming from that these guys are using out there in Will County, and in Larimer County, and across the state. They've got a number of different sources of water that they can acquire. And the state's looked at this and looked at what are those legally available sources of water. There's a number of them. Water transported from outside of Colorado. Cheyenne was selling water, you know, for the Grover jobs and all that in northern Colorado. Hey, made sense to them. Irrigation water, if it's consumptive use water, and if it's either transfer or you have a substitute supply plan, you can use irrigation water. Obviously municipal water, right? Greeley and a lot of the communities around have been selling frack water. We can talk about that. Reusable wastewater. You're not going to get a new surface water diversion on the South Platte, but there's other places in Colorado that presumably you could. And then of course tributary, non-tributary, and designated basin groundwater is also being used for fracking in Colorado. And it's really hard to parse out the numbers of what water is going where because they don't have to tell us. That's the way Colorado water law works, right? Unless you're going in for a change of use or a substitute supply plan, if you've got water that's adjudicated for multiple use, you don't have to call anybody and tell them that you're going to sell that to a water supply company. You get to do that. And then the bottom line, this one down here is one I want to plant in your mind. And that is this idea of recycling either produced water or frac flow back water, okay? And right now, we're doing very little of that in Colorado. We have the technology to do it, but it's more expensive. That's the deal. And we can talk about the whys. The other thing is this produced water, and I wanted to mention this. I said it was like 20 barrels for every barrel of oil. We produce, from oil and gas in Colorado, about 57,000 acre-feet of water a year. Okay? That's what's coming up to the surface from these old deep formations, 57,000 acre-feet of water. So remember, we're using 20,000 for fracking and drilling. We're producing about 57,000. So a lot of water's coming up. What are we doing with that water that's coming up, right? And so there are a number of pathways, but in general, most of the water out east of where we're sitting tonight, east, I think, is being reinjected, all right? In Colorado, if you look at the fate of all produced water, about 20% of it goes into evaporation ponds, about 20% of it can be surface discharged, and about 60% of it goes into Class 2 injection wells. We've got about 300 Class 2 injection wells in Colorado, and what they're doing basically is putting that, what they consider to be brine, down in a formation of this, that will take that water, and it's a way of disposing of that water. So it's kind of a no-brainer that a lot of the solution to the problem that we're talking about here tonight is close the loop, right? Let's gather that produced water and frac flow back. Let's treat it, and let's use it for the next job. And this is on the radar of the energy companies. Cost them more money, right? The big operators are more interested in doing this because I think they plan to be in it for the long haul, and there is a scale issue here. To ramp up a treatment plant, you've got to have enough scale to make that worthwhile. I need to mention, no frac flow back water gets surface discharge. I wanted to make sure I didn't leave that impression. It's produced water, mainly in the Raton Basin, where there are permits for surface discharge. And that water's reasonably decent quality, and it can be pretty easily treated. So here's, and I'm getting there, Patty.
Oh, it's fine.
Okay.
Totally fine.
So here's some more data from Boulder County. And basically, this is just one well that I took, because I thought it showed very nicely what happened. So remember, we're going to put a lot of pressure and punch 3 million gallons of water down on the ground and frack it. And what happens when you take the lid off of that, right? You get a lot of, well, we had a blowout recently, but basically they take it off carefully, because as soon as they take the lid off, that frack water starts coming back immediately. And in general, 40 to 50% of that water will come back in the first few days or week. And really, what this graphic is showing on this one well, this is water produced, barrels, and that's 100 right there. And this is days, time. And so what happens, you take the lid off, you get ready to go into production phase, and the frac flow back water starts coming back hard and fast. The frac flow back water, a lot of that is currently recycled. Okay, they capture that, they put it in those tanks and those trucks. They can reformulate for the next batch, dilute, use, and make that work. It makes sense economically to recycle the frac flow back. But at some point in time, you kind of cross this place to where you're beginning to get towards production and bringing up hydrocarbons, and you'll start to bring up produced water as well, right? The brines that are down there associated with the oil and gas. And that's what the red line is showing. And these fields, so, at some point you've got about half the frac flow back, and then you start getting frac flow back in produced water, and it begins to where you really can't tell the difference because you've diluted that frac flow back and it's produced water. And some of these wells will produce water for 100 years. you'll get a long tail, and that becomes a bigger and bigger cost of business for these guys, is dealing with that water as their energy production declines over time. So we are really interested, and I'm not going to spend any time on this, in this area of how do we, this is just a schematic of treating water. Don't even bother to look at it. It's ridiculous. But it's really, how do we get there? And we have the technology. That's the great thing. We have the way to do it. We've just got to make it cost effective and encourage the producers to go there. Okay, so I'm going to try to bring this to a conclusion, but I wanted to leave you all with some thoughts about Colorado water and where we're going in the future of this state. I think it's hugely important that you all understand this as well as fracking. And so the deal is that people want to move to Colorado. And, it looks like we're going to double this state's population if we're not careful by 2050. And they all want water. And they don't call ahead to see if there's water, if it'll be here, right? They just show up and assume it will. And so if you look to the future of Colorado, we're going to need a bunch more water. And what I can tell you is we are very close to being a fully appropriated state already. The Colorado River Basin is the only place left in the state where there's unappropriated water, mainly on the Yampa White in Colorado. That's it. So we're fully appropriated, surface and groundwater. In fact, we're over-appropriated for groundwater in a lot of the state of Colorado. Why? It's an arid place, and it takes a lot of water to grow crops, and we got ourselves there, and we're not looking for that to really change. So the reality is, we live in this arid place, and what I think a lot of people don't understand, this is a map of the rivers going out of Colorado, and there's one point I want to make here to you, and that is, if you look at our water budget in the state of Colorado, we produce about 15 million acre-feet of water every year in our streams. The downstream states claim 9 of that, and they want it every year. Okay? So we live on a third of the water that we produce in Colorado. There's no give in that. Those interstate compacts are federal law, right? They have the enforcement of the Supreme Court and the Congress. That's that. So we have a fixed supply of water. We have this darn problem of drought. This is last week's drought monitor, by the way. That was great snow, but we need a bunch more. And what happens is, and this is just a hydrograph down on the South Platte, annually. It's just showing you annually how much water flows by the Kersey gauge. We have these huge variations, right? From wet years to years where there's almost no water flowing in our systems. And the other part that's really important to understanding Western water is, because we're a snowmelt-driven system, it all comes off in a couple of months, right? So we've got all this variability, we're in this arid place, the water all comes off in a couple of months, and everybody wants to move here. So if you look at, the state and many water people are wringing their hands thinking, how much water do we need, where is it going to come from? And basically, we know we need about another 10% more than what we have now. Maybe we need 1 million acre-feet, depending on what happens with climate change and water demand. So we need a bunch of water in Colorado if we don't change something about our future and the way that we develop and the way that we use and conserve water. And what we know is right now it's coming out of agriculture, right? And a lot of this fracking water is coming out of agriculture. And if you're a farmer and you're used to paying $30 to rent an acre-foot of water for your crop, because that's about what it's worth to you, 30 or 50 bucks, and the fellow from the water supply or the services company says, I'll give you $2,000 for that. You're going to grow hay or are you going to take a vacation? For an individual, it's not a hard decision for these folks to make. They're business people. For a state and for a community, there might be a different set of things that we want to think about going forward here. So the solutions are a mix of how do we get there as a community, as this community of Colorado, and we're going to need all of these things to get us where we're going, and energy is going to be part of those bites that are happening on our water supply. And that's probably the last point I'm going to make. Well, I'll make one more, Patty, if you'll allow me. I don't want to leave you with the impression that 20,000 acre-feet of water that is being used in fracking represents a new depletion. Okay? So make sure you understand that. Basically, it's a substitution. For the most part, it's 20,000 acre feet of water that's not being used to grow grass or hay, corn. You got that? I mean, I just want to make sure you understand that. And that's the way it's going to be moving forward. Basically, there's a finite amount of water. We found the limits to our water supply. If we're going to put water into developing this resource, it's going to come out of another use, mostly agriculture. Okay, so Patty, when she set all this up, and I'm sorry I did not mean to talk this long. She said, well, tell us what you know, and then what don't you know? And what we don't know is huge, okay? There's a lot of things we don't know, and that's why Joe Ryan got this money to try to study this and understand it better. And in terms of water quantity, I think a lot of what we need to understand is, what are the trade-offs? What does this do to our agriculturally dependent communities? What does it mean for Weld County or Boulder County as we move water from one use, like agriculture and food, to another use, like energy production? And I think that's an important question. I think this question of how can the industry minimize its water footprint, this is on their mind. There's other ways you can frack besides water. You know, they used to use diesel, right? You guys know that? Yeah. So there's other things you could use. Actually, propane can be used. I mean, there are people experimenting with this idea of how do you do it besides water. But perhaps what we want to know is just how do we reduce that? How can we make recycling be more effective? How can we take advantage of produced waters and brine waters, waters that aren't valuable to us? And then the final question I left was, are there viable alternatives to getting our energy this way, to both from the water point of view as well as others? And I think all of those are questions, and you probably have thought of some more, because I see a big stack of them. So Patty, with that, I'm going to stop.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Reagan. Okay.
And thank you.
Oh, that's beautiful.
It's the pudding.
Well, there's questions about that probably. So, okay, I'm going to start off. Thank you all for your questions, and I can see patterns here. So what I have first are just sort of, first terms. You mentioned that the terms withdrawals and delivery.
Yeah.
So could you walk us quickly through the definitions of
Sure.
water use, delivery, withdrawals? This is spelled, and that I had my first husband always spelled it that way too. DRAWL. So you may say that with withdrawal because you're from Texas. You went to school in Texas. So if you would do withdrawals from Texas and.
In Colorado, we withdraw from our groundwater and our surface streams 14 million acre feet. Okay, I said that we run about 15 or 16. We withdraw 14 of that. Isn't that amazing? We consume of that 14 about 5 to 6 million acre feet. So think about it in your house. The water that you drink is consumed. The water that goes down your sink goes back to the system and its return flow. So it was withdrawn, but it was not consumed. And I just think when people hear folks talking about water numbers, you need to really understand, what are they talking about here? Put it in perspective. And okay, so full truth in advertising, the energy companies, a lot of times when they're looking at their water footprint, they will look at that 14 million acre foot of total withdrawals. I don't think that's the right way to look at it. I think we need to look at it as a consumptive use point of view, because the water that we put down in the hole for the most part is consumed. Okay? So that's the point.
Great. And then just an informational matter here. Why does horizontal fracking take so much more water than vertical fracking? And in Colorado, what is the total production from vertical as opposed to horizontal?
Oh, in terms of energy production? Oh, Lord.
Well, we have other speakers rated, so this is a series. So you may.
Do you remember this number, Joe? I mean, we're talking, gas is terms of trillions of cubic feet, and oil, it's in terms of millions of barrels. Gosh, I should have studied harder before, but
why did you just
the question about vertical, and we
you
can look that number up. I've actually probably got that in my briefcase, but if somebody really wants to know, come up afterwards and we'll look it up. But obviously a vertical, so here's your shale layer sitting down there at 8,000 feet. A vertical, punches through those 200 feet and stops, right? So it drills down to 8,000 feet or to 6,000 feet, goes through the formation, perforates where the formation is. Horizontal well goes down there, takes a 90-degree turn, and runs all the way through it. So you're perforating all of that. So, I mean, you can just, I mean, it's a no-brainer why a horizontal well is going to produce so much more energy, and because it's twice as long or 3 times as long. And remember, it's the frac zone, right? So you're putting that water and sand into that frac zone. So that vertical well, you're only going to frac the producing formation, right? So they'll seal off between. Does that make sense? So when you're horizontal, you're going to frac all of that part of the formation. So it takes order of magnitude more water.
And by the way, if you do have questions that have not been picked up, they are just sylph-like. They're question picker-uppers, how they glide around the room in such an unobtrusive manner, so that the sylph-like, that was a lot better than that mouse-like thing, which did not work for me, but they will just glide over and get your questions, and I can then add them to my stack. So there are several questions here, and you have spoken on this. These probably came in just before you turned to it, so if there's more you want to say to this, these are variations on what happens to the water solution after it's used for fracking, what happens to the chemicalized water, I guess with an accent on the chemicals there, after it was used in the fracking process. Is it stored somewhere, or does it go into the ground? And you did speak of treatment, but these are all what happens to the used water.
So all I'll add is last week Susan Tierney talked about sort of closing the system, green completions, right? And basically are those waters put into open pits and held there, or are they captured in tanks? And there's a lot of different things that are happening out there, and I'm not sure I can give the central tendency, but in general, a lot of this water is hauled off site, right? So it comes up, goes into a tank with the chemicals that are in it, and then it's hauled off to either an injection point or a recycling facility. And remember I said the frac flowback, for the most part, is captured and reused, for the most part, not exclusively. The produced water just keeps coming and keeps coming and keeps coming. And part of the problem is you've got this distributed network out there. And so moving that water and reusing it is problematic, right? Then you got to haul it to the next side and hold it there and treat it and get it ready. And so the technology around these big horizontal pads where they're drilling 8 or 20 holes, it seems kind of, ginormous. It's an industrial scale sort of thing, but it also facilitates, I think, a more unitized treatment, capture. In a lot of ways it's better. Let's have the one big pad with 20, and we can put up a recycling facility and a manifold, and we can, it's going to work a lot better for energy companies in terms of incurring that cost of treating and reusing the water.
Okay, a little bit of a technical matter on, well, it seems a little technical to me, on flowback. Is the acre-foot consumption figure cited for the gross or net of flowback for hydraulic fracturing?
Yeah, it's gross. Okay, so the gross amount that is being used is around 20,000 acre-feet right now.
Okay, several, and again, here, these, you may have covered these to your satisfaction, but
This is like a quiz show.
Oh, I tell you, it's totally like a quiz show.
Shouldn't there be bells
the
or prizes?
$50,000 or $64,000 question is over here, but I haven't asked it yet. So, $64,000 doesn't sound as much as it used to, does it? Okay, so how much of the water is reusable? What percent of water you use in the oil production process is retrieved as the production process goes on, and what about the water coming out? What happens to it? So anything? Oh, thank you. Oh,
I'm not sure there's a lot to add there. It's all reusable. It's just a matter of how much it costs to treat it, okay? And it's all reusable. We can treat water that, I mean, you're right, we do it. But it's a cost of production, and we have created other pathways for that, which is deep injection, evaporation. There's like 5 different things you can do with produced water in Colorado that are legally permitted. You can use it for dust suppression, and you just got to have a deal with the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission, and they have to know what you're doing with your produced water.
One just quick thing on, how is this water monitored?
Yeah. How is this water monitored? I'm going to let Joe Ryan have that one. You want that one? So, the question that's implied really is, how is the industry monitoring
That would be the
versus
right.
how is Joe Ryan?
That was a passive voice, is monitored, but you can, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to pass on that one.
All right, okay.
But if you're going to use it for re-makeup water or you're going to treat it, you have to chemically know what's in it. Okay?
Okay, now we're shifting to water rights, and you may,
Good, I like that. I feel
Okay.
better about water.
well, all righty. How do the drilling companies get water rights? We'll start with that one.
Okay, so for the most, the oil shale people on the west slope own and hold huge conditional water rights. That's different from Encana or Anadarko or BP or Ranger, or, some company that's come up from Texas. They don't want water rights, okay? They're moving around. They're going to come in and they're going to produce this field, and then they're going to move on. And so what happens is that there's ancillary industries that pop up around this. And so there are service companies that produce that water. For the most part, they can come in and buy water. They can buy multiple use water. They can probably buy it from Boulder. Are you guys selling any water? Do you know? Hey, the price is great. The utilities love that price. It's a good deal. So basically, for the most part, they don't want water rights, but there are, I can tell you, factually, there are water rights being changed in the basin right now, in the South Platte Basin, that are going from ag rights to multiple use rights. And they're going to multiple use so that somebody's making this deal. And there's some smart business people out there that smell money that are going to go through this adjudication. You have to go through court to do this. And then they'll be able to sell that multiple use water to any. But it can still be used for ag, it can be used for industry, it can be used for fracking, it can be used for drilling. And so, Noble and Anadarko and those folks don't really, that's not the way they look at it. Because they're going to be here for a while, and that's something we need to think about. These booms always end, right? They always end. And what's left, and this water demand won't be there forever. They will rework these wells. They'll re-stimulate them, and they'll come back and re-frack them. So there'll be another frack job on a lot of these wells later.
Legal challenges. How many suits are currently in progress challenging sales of water for fracking, fracking based on illegal withdrawal from hydrologic cycle?
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't anticipate that question, but I had a meeting with the state engineer today on a different topic, and his answer would be 0.
Huh.
Yeah. It's not a concern. He's not concerned and is not currently working on any of those problems. There have been some problems. I don't want to say that there haven't. And the problem have been in water is adjudicated for a specific use in Colorado. And there have been some incidents, and for the most part, I think those have been dealt with. And so at this moment in time, I'm not aware, and he wasn't aware of any such cases.
Has there ever been a shale play that has had development limited due to water supply?
Oh. Well, I don't know, Patty.
Well, I don't
So
know.
I finally get to fail at a question. Ring the other bell.
Would you like to talk about Estonia?
Not that I'm aware. I will say no. I don't want to talk about Estonia. In the United States, not that I'm aware of. Water isn't what limits oil production thus far. Now, if that curve that we saw in terms of shale gas production keeps going up, that story may change in the future.
Okay. Do you think there will be any long-term pollution of any local underground aquifers from fracking chemicals, et cetera, and a danger to health? I think it says cheers at the end with a happy face.
Energy production can be a messy business. Things happen out there. Guys are working around the clock. To think that there will be no incidents of problems would probably be a bit foolhardy.
Okay. We're sort of in the problem mode, as you
Yeah,
can
I
probably
see
see
that.
how I have these stacked here. It's very elegant. What I've done here is very elegant. But now we have induced seismic activity. What can you say regarding the possibility of inducing seismic activity due to the introduction of fracking fluids into the earth?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and it's not one that I have personal expertise on, but here's what I understand, and that is that the fracking itself is not where the concern about induced seismicity occurs. It's really the deep injection. If you inject enough in a class 2 injection well, UIC, if you got a slip fault there, you inject enough water, it's been shown, you can induce seismicity. This is a known phenomenon that is an undesirable aspect of injection wells.
I'm going to Arkansas tomorrow.
Good.
Yes, a
You
little
look
bit of
at the,
comparative perspective. So do you have
yeah.
anything I should be
No,
thinking about in
no.
Arkansas? Because that's where they have
Yeah,
been
they induce seismicity.
trouble with that, yeah, okay. Okay, so we have, the Oglala Aquifer would not be engaged in this situation, or
Well,
what-
if you
or-
remember the map I showed, anybody with photographic memory might recall that there is a field out in Yuma County, right? So there's production out there, there's new wells out there. That's definitely sitting on the Oglala, so, yeah.
Okay, now I have two that are sort of, it takes energy to produce energy questions. How much energy is consumed in moving water around by truck, et cetera?
Oh, yeah. Isn't that crazy? I don't know. I mean, a bunch of diesel, right? And a lot of dust and a lot of traffic. And so, if you drive out into rural northern Weld County, you'll see these interesting pipes laid around, black pipes. And again, they're trying to get away from some of this. And what's essentially happening out there is they've made a deal with a landowner who's got a non-tributary well. So a well that's in the Laramie Fox Hills or some other non-tributary formation, they're hooked up, money has changed hands, they put in a pipe. The energy companies are well aware of the fact that the 300 truck trips it takes for a single frac job is a lot. Single drill job, frac job, completion, basically a completion is 1,000 truck trips, more or less. It's a lot of diesel and dust, and it's a cost of business that's not one that is favorable, and they know it. Yeah, I don't know the numbers, so sorry.
In the same spirit here, what percentage of energy produced by horizontal well drilling would be needed to fully treat produced water from that?
Wow. Yeah, the astute part of that question is it is energy intensive to treat that water, right?
Right.
It's gonna peel off some of the benefit of those wells to do that. That's why desalinization's not very popular unless you're in Kuwait or someplace with a lot of energy. I don't know what the percentage is, but I believe that we can get the technology there. Part of the group that's working here at CU's got some water treatment people, and I think I have hope that we can do that and it can become an acceptable cost of business to treat that water and to deal with the brines.
Okay, here I may need, this is out of I'm a Western historian.
I love it that people
these are
want all these
a little
numbers.
bit beyond my range here, but, okay. How about if we just hand you that?
Oh.
There. And in
Is
fact,
this how the
this
quiz
is sort
show
of the same
goes?
one. There are chemicals
Yeah.
on here. There are various.
Right, so yeah, I love it. I got a question. I must be in a college town. I mean, come on. This is great. So the person's talking about combustion is producing water. So why do we so rarely think about it as a source of water? Probably because it's just not enough and evaporative, but maybe we should, right? I don't know. I'm not a thermodynamic chemical engineer, so I wish I had a better answer. Joe, do you want it? You're a chemical engineer. Should we harvest the water off of the combustion cycle? Will that solve our problem?
Turning methane into CO2 produces water, is that the?
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Energy, CO2, and water are the byproducts, right?
Yeah, so
Good idea.
you mentioned it, where does it end up? It's water vapor.
Yeah.
Well, that's
So
good.
you'd have to distill it. You'd have to.
Want
set
to
it
turn
up.
into rain? No. Okay. I am a little bit out of my turf here.
So, these are great questions. You guys are amazing. I mean, it's 8 o'clock. You're still talking
It's not
about
8 o'clock. It's
fracking water. And, I mean, Boulder, I love it. Really, this is why this is a great community, right? People here really care about the resources. And sorry I can't answer all your questions.
This is an apples to apples comparison. As an average, how do the following technologies compare in terms of all in the life cycle usage? The industry seems to focus only on the combustion aspect of water consumption, ignoring all other consumptive uses needed before and after the kilowatt is generated.
Yeah. I mean, this is going back to this idea of the life cycle of energy production and getting a more sophisticated thought process about how much water or how much carbon or how much energy is really going into this life cycle analysis. And I think when you start to do some of that and you see all the costs that are more or less externalized, the equation changes. And I think I don't have the number, but I think that's what's implied there, is that there's a lot more going on in terms of what it's taking for us to live these lives that we want, that we externalize, right?
Sorry.
Okay, so just quickly.
Yeah, you want it, Mark? Go for it.
Here's Mark Williams from our team.
Nobody knows the answer to that.
Yeah.
I'm clear about that. But that's one of our goals of our SRM to address.
To look at life cycle analysis,
Right.
what these footprints are and what they mean.
Right.
I like it that he said nobody knows the answer. I thought you were going to say you don't know the answer, which is true. I'm there with you, Mark.
What legislative, litigation, or ballot initiative binding role should the public trust doctrine play to protect public's interest in and control of the public's water resources?
Wow, what a question.
Well, there you are.
So you guys, somebody in this room obviously knows that there's been a proposal several times that we change our constitution to incorporate the public trust into the way that we administer, allocate, and manage our water. So right now we're using a prior appropriations system. And public trust, prior appropriation is one of probably 7 or 9 different ways that water can be allocated. There's nothing magic about it, it's just what we do. Yeah, right. Our system is based upon a system of rights, property or usufructuary or property rights. And the question is, should that be the only consideration? I think, should public trust be incorporated into our Constitution, is what you're saying, so that the consideration of the public's interest in a water withdrawal is considered. In other words, we dry up our streams, right? The way our system works, you can take it all if you have that water right. The market can allocate water from agriculture to energy without the public's interest necessarily having to be considered in that. And so it's an astute and interesting question. It's not one that I know a lot about, but I know that there's great interest in changing our system, our water rights system in Colorado from prior appropriation to public trust. And it would overlay a new set of considerations for how we use and withdraw or preserve and protect water. I think
We're the only state to be purely appropriate in the western states.
yeah, so the point the gentleman's making is that there's hybrids. I mean, California is probably the best example of a hybrid public trust, prior appropriation, riparian rights states. As citizens, you might get a chance to make that discussion. It's not one I'm really prepared to discuss.
Well, that is a segue. I'm down to just a couple.
Oh, yay.
We have not found the $64,000 one yet, though. What I have here are really in tune with your conclusion about the big picture of different uses here. So 86% of water use in Colorado goes to irrigation. How much of this is returned to the water table or rivers?
Yeah. So that's great. So we withdraw somewhere around 12 to 14 million acre feet for irrigation. We consume somewhere around 5 to 6, so a lot. So more than half of it is return flow, either to groundwater or surface water. And of course, the way our system works is the next junior gets to enjoy that return flow, right? You don't have the right to, you get one use of water, unless it's multiple use water or fully consumable, and then it goes to the next person. So ag, as you increase irrigation efficiency, you can increase the percentage that applied that's consumed. But right now, it's not that high.
Should fracking water needs be compared to agriculture water or municipal water needs, and to what proportion or conclusion there?
Yeah, that's a really interesting philosophical question. So, in the way we look at water in Colorado, it's a property right that we can move around, that we can buy and sell, and we can take it to the highest economic good. So, the pure market-based economist would say, yeah, it's an input, and you use it. I think the question maybe is implying, are those equally valuable to us as a society? Is food production as valuable as watering bluegrass?
In regards to one.
Okay. Yeah. So I don't know the answer in regards to Longmont. Maybe there's a good one, but I see the question, and maybe the questioner wants to elaborate a little bit, but
Well, according to Western Resource Advocates, which I think according to Western Resource Advocates paper that they did called Fracking Our Future,
yes.
one of the things that they mentioned is the comparison between water used for fracking and comparing that to just agricultural water, essentially all of Colorado's water,
Yeah.
maybe like 1%
Right.
of Colorado's water, is not necessarily what should be compared when you're talking about Longmont. It should be the amount of water for fracking in relation to the municipal needs of Longmont, which is maybe 50%.
Yeah, if the water is
Yeah,
particularly.
could we state a little?
Yeah, so the question is really the comparison that the oil companies make is they like to compare agriculture, which is this huge user of water, to fracking, as they see we're using less than, I don't know what the number is, point something percent of a percent. Yeah, that's the oil and gas position. It's a de minimis use, basically, is what they're trying to say. But of course, that water is spread out all over the 66 million acres of Colorado. That water's all over the place. And the point that in the Western Resource Advocates Fracking in the Future that was made is that's a kind of a bogus comparison is what they were saying, and that really you need to look at it locally. You need to look at it in terms of what's being substituted. You need to look at it in terms of that community, and that's really the comparison to make. If, for example, I said I think it probably takes 20,000 acre-feet of water for the city of Boulder, if Boulder was going to have 20,000 acre-feet of fracking water, there's a comparison, right? Do we want to make that trade-off? And right now, the market allows us to make that
Just
trade-off.
in relation to Longmont, we're using a lot of the water for fracking in relation to the municipal needs of Longmont.
Fair enough.
That's a lot of water to be taken from the upper Colorado River, which is dying because of a lessening of water.
Fair enough. There are a lot of ways these comparisons can be made, and obviously people want to make them to make their point. And I think part of what we need to do is really get to this, hopefully in the project, is looking at how do we establish some benchmarks that really make sense for counties and communities to understand what they're investing in terms of resources.
Right.
Do we have to basically sacrifice one resource to get another?
That's really, I'll just agree that that's the core of our enterprise, is to come up with that. But it's a 5-year enterprise, and we're just a few months out of the gate here. So if we do not throw bright light on these topics, we're coming along, we're moving along. So just a couple of last ones here. Hydrologic cycle questions here. There is a long queue for water rights in the west. There is not enough water for everyone or everything. Why should we remove any water from the hydrological cycle? And is indeed, well, so that
Yeah, so
that's back to your review. So.
in the big picture, we're not. But I think what's being implied there is when you're deep injecting that 20 or 50,000 acre-feet of water, you're taking out of the hydrologic cycle for a really long time is what I think is being implied there. The thinking is, again, it's de minimis. It's a very small amount of water in terms of the hydrologic cycle, which is huge. The why, I think a lot of these are, I mean, you guys are going right to the values proposition here in terms of what you all, what the community wants to value. I think if you look at the amount of water that's moving around the hydrologic cycle, this is beyond de minimis in amount in that sense, okay? And we could talk about Colorado's water balance if you wanted to, but it's a very small amount of water, okay, in the big picture.
I might do a little rewrite. I shall read this to you in an accusatory manner, and then I shall glare at you as I read this. Okay. How can you support more fracking when just hoping for a technology fix to treat the water? I might say, do you support more fracking and offer just the the notion of reuse. Is
Yeah.
there, well, okay.
So, wow, that was rough, Patty.
Well, Reagan, at some point that has to happen between us.
I
That
know,
can't-
we were gonna go there, weren't we? So I'm not up here I'm not supporting fracking, I'm up here talking about how we get our energy and what the input, the water input is around that. If we can figure out a better way to create a better energy future, I'm with you, Patty, let's go there. In the meantime, the way you get that shale gas is through horizontal drilling and fracking. And that's considered, the right to exploit that resource is considered a property right. And is, as you know, as a historian, that's part of the bedrock foundation of this capitalistic democratic society, right? So I'm not here fighting for that, but I do think that the people who own the property rights to develop those minerals certainly would.
Okay, the last two questions here. One person, I think, is correcting you. I should read this to you sternly as well. An Olympic size, the size of an Olympic pool. An Olympic-sized pool is 50 meters in length. There are only 5 in Colorado. Most
So
are
you-
25 yards or 25 meters.
So we don't have an Olympic pool here? Is that
I have no
what you're
idea. I'm not,
I thought the flagship university.
I think you're being
would.
corrected. You're being corrected, but I can't, I'm so out of my turf. I'm sorry to the
Okay.
question asker.
We
I'm
gotta
sorry.
go to Thornton to get to.
Okay, I did a disservice to the question asker there
I
because,
was,
but actually,
CU should start a fundraising, right?
go Rams, help the Buffs. So, but really, this person has asked a question that is so important. I wanted to have it second to last here. How does climate change affect this picture?
How does climate change affect this picture? So, as a water resources person, I'll answer that from the water side, not the energy side. And what we know is it's going to get warmer. We don't know how much warmer, but it's going to get warmer. And what that means is that the evapotranspiration rates of our watersheds will increase under warmer conditions. We don't know whether it gets drier and warmer or warmer and, all that's not worked out. But long run is your watersheds are likely to produce less water. And I think this is a really concerning point for Colorado is that, we're already at the limits of our resource, and yet we want to put another 5 million people here on the Front Range, and we all want to live well and drive big cars. And it's going to be tricky, I think, in terms of meeting those water needs. And the likely pathway in the next 50 years is that we're going to lose a lot of agriculture in the state of Colorado. We'll lose a lot of our green spaces and our food productive potential. I can't see out very much further than that when the real action starts in the last half of this century. I just can't peer that far, but it looks as if there will be less water. The reservoir, our major reservoir in Colorado is our snowpack, and the whole system is predicated on the snowpack hydrology. So it's pretty sobering.
Well, I kept this for the very last because I think it is a way of saying how much we have appreciated your expertise and what a value has contributed to our lives. And the question is, can we get a copy of your slides?
Patty gets a copy of my slides. She can do whatever she wants to. Okay.
Great.
So
Well, thank
you.
you so much.